values. Okay, what's the definition, first of all, of what this is all about, absolute value? It is a magnitude of a real number without regard to its sign. So when I think about absolute value, I often go to distance in my brain. So if somebody, let's say, went to Rosenfeld, 5 kilometers north, I would talk about that kind of being a positive 5. And if I talked about 5 kilometers south to Gretna, I would say, well, that's a negative 5. But when I talk about the absolute value of it, I'm forgetting about the direction, and we're just going to talk about they both drove a distance of 5. I don't care if it's positive 5 or negative 5. I just care about the magnitude, so just the 5. Okay? So here we go. So these bars, like brackets, mean absolute value brackets. So they're straight brackets, not curvy. So the absolute value of 3 is just a magnitude of 3. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Just has a magnitude of 3. So again, it's without the direction part of it. Okay, so here it's like BEDMAS. You have to do inside the brackets first. So what's 2 subtract 7? Negative 5. And then what's the absolute value of a negative 5? It's 5. Same thing here. You have to do the inside the brackets first. So we have to do a 10 subtract 2, which is 8. Then what's the absolute value of 8? 8. Okay, this one's a little bit different because this is outside of the bracket, so that's treated differently. So if I do this part, what's the absolute value of negative 15? 15, but then I have to times by a negative 1. So that one ends up being negative 15 because of that negative being outside after the fact. Okay, so solving equations. So would it make sense that I could do the absolute value of 4 and get a 4? Or I could take the absolute value of negative 4 and get a 4. Okay, here 2x in the bracket could have been the absolute value of 10 or the absolute value of negative 10. Which means on this example, x would be 5, and on this one it would be negative 5. Okay, so here the x minus 2 in the brackets could have been worth 5, or the x minus 2 could have been or it could have been a negative 5. So I'm not answering x right away. I'm saying what could be in the brackets. There could have been a 5 or a negative 5 in the brackets. So this is what I'm doing. The bracket stuff could have been a 5, or the bracket stuff could have been a negative 5. Okay? Now is when you solve. So here we go. Plus 2x is 7. Plus 2x could have been a negative 3. Okay, can you try that one on your own? This example is exactly this example. Try it and see what you get. Okay, so my first setup was talking about, well, this inside of the brackets could have been 11 or it could have been negative 11. That was my first idea. And then I solved and got 2 answers. Okay, this next one, I don't want you to start absoluting yet until you do something first. You're going to add 5. You're going to move that first. And then you can carry on exactly what we did before. So now I'm going to say this inside the brackets could have been an 8, or this inside could have been a negative 8. Okay. Do you notice when I have my brackets on here, but here is when I take it off? Because at this point, I'm saying the inside could be this or the inside could be that. Okay, so here I still want them on, but as soon as I split, that's when I take the brackets off. Okay, and if you are going to get something that's fraction-y, just leave it. Just leave it like a fraction. Don't have to simplify it. Don't have to use your calculator for decimals. Just leave it like that. Okay, the next one. So the first thing I'm going to do is maneuver that. That's a good question. So what should we write? Yep, we're already questioning it. So yep, there's no solution to this because the absolute value is the magnitude. Can we ever have a magnitude of negative 2? No.
So it can never equal negative.
Never equal a negative. Because the absolute value of 2 is 2, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2, right? Always has a magnitude of 2. Can't have the negative. Okay, you're going to do this one on your own. Go ahead. This one is the same, exact same as this. Try it on your own. This and this one are the same. Just show me your steps. Okay, go ahead. So on this, on your test, I will deduct points if you aren't doing your brackets in the correct spot. So here you have to have the brackets on. So if you didn't, that'd be wrong. And then when you split and talk about what you could have as options, that's when you drop them. Okay?
And when do you drop it?
when I'm saying like here, I'm splitting and I'm saying the inside could have been 18 or the inside could have been a negative 18. So when I'm saying like the inside stuff could be this or that. Okay, I need you to do like a bunch of flips, almost to the end of this. Okay, graphing the absolute value. So this is something you do a lot in grade 12. So I don't like to spend a lot of time with it in grade 12, so I'd like to dial in here and make sure you try to remember it so I don't have to reteach it. Okay, so absolute value, so remember the symbol is those brackets, and you most likely see something like this, graphing the absolute value of the function. So that's what it would probably look like. Okay, so let's talk about this. What if your value was positive? So for instance, if I have the absolute value of 8, it is 8. So should we say it just stayed, right? You didn't do anything. If it was absolute value of 8, it was still 8. What about the number 0? So stays. So the absolute value is 0. You can have 0 magnitude, 0. And then what about a negative value? So for instance, what's the absolute value of negative 5? Positive 5. So it changes to the positive, right? The magnitude part of it. Okay, so that's it. That's what we're going to do. Ready? Okay, so where is this graph positive or 0? And when I say that, I'm talking about the height of it. So that section is going to, what did we say? Stay and stay. So you need to overlap that part of the graph. Okay, this part of the graph is positive and 0, so then it's going to stay. So that's going to stay, that's going to stay. So it's going to get overlapped. Now, this section of the graph has a negative height. This whole section is negative, so I'm going to change it. So if I go to this bottom here, this coordinate is the coordinate 1, negative 3. What am I going to do? I'm going to change the coordinate to 1, positive 3. So I reflected it. Did you see a reflection? I went from the negative and I reflected it up to be positive. So you can see if I put my pen here, there was a height of negative 1. Boom, there it is now at positive 1 height.
What? Isn't all that x-axis now?
The y-axis, so we're talking about the heights like that.
Yeah, but isn't 1 the x?
1 is x and negative 3 is the y. So we're changing the heights of the graph, the heights. So the height was negative 3, so we changed the height to positive 3.
Yeah, but why isn't it not 1 over?
This point is now here. So I went from here and I moved it to there.
Right.
I just moved the height of it. I didn't move it left or right at all. I just moved it the height. Okay, so kind of at the end, this is what I should see. I should never see anything right below there. I shouldn't see anything under there at all when I'm done. Okay, next, y equals the absolute value of x minus 5. Well, first, how in the world do you do this? Grade 10. A whole entire unit about graphing this. What is the shape of this? A line. What kinds of two properties do you know about this line?
Slope of 1.
Slope of 1. And what's that thing all about at the end of that line?
It's up 5? No, down 5.
Something is down 5. What should we call it? The y. So the y-intercept. I'm going to draw this lightly because it's not going to be my final graph. So the y-intercept is negative 5. And how do you ever do a slope of 1? What kind of moves would you make on a graph? Do you remember how to move on a line? Slope is a rise divided by a run. So how do you do 1?
Go up 1, side 1, up 1, right.
Up 1, right 1, up 1, right 1, yep. So that's the graph. Before we haven't absoluted it yet though, right? Okay, how do we absolute it? What are our rules? Can't be negative. So this section here is the negative section. This section here is positive and 0, right? So where is it positive or 0? It's going to stay. So now I'm going to draw this in nice and overlapped.
Why do we say it's a 0 when it's like on 5?
Because the height of it. Height. We're going to talk all about heights. So that's going to stay because it has a positive height, a 0 height. And then this whole section needs to change. Okay, so for instance, this coordinate 0, negative 5, I'm now going to place it at 0, comma, positive 5. And there you go. That's my final graph. And again, my final graph, look at it. Nothing's going to be down there at all, right? It can't have negatives. No solutions, right? Can't have negatives. Okay, last one. So I gave you just a really random graph, so follow the rules. Ready? This little section here, it's going to stay. This, I'm going to call it a hill. That's going to stay. And then this section is going to stay. So there's the 3 parts that I'm going to stay put because they were positive or 0. And then there's 2 sections that are negative heights, so they're going to have to change. So I can see that it went all the way down to a -7. So there's my final graph, and again, so like this, there's nothing down there anymore at all. Okay, something really important. It's a big deduction in grade 12. Do you notice this graph? Did you notice that I didn't draw arrows there? Why didn't I draw arrows? Because the original graph didn't have an arrow, so I don't have an arrow. Okay? I drew arrows here. Why did I draw arrows there? Because the original graph had an arrow. Okay? So be careful. Arrows, if the original has an arrow, the original doesn't, you don't. Okay, there's, in your homework, there's just a couple of different things you might see. Just super quick, what would you do if you saw this? Because first of all, what's going to go on with the graph of this? Who remembers this? This is like half of our year this year. What's that shape? It's a parabola like that, right? Remember that? What do you know about that to the parabola? Moves it down 5. And do you remember how to make other points? Do you remember that pattern of parabolas? 1, 1, 2, 4. Remember that? 1, 1, 2, 4. What's the next set of points? 3, 9. Okay? And then what would you do if you had to absolute this now? This would stay, this would stay, and that whole little thing would change positive, right? Does that kind of make sense? Just remembering, hey, we graphed these things. You got to go back to the parabola shape. Okay? And then there's one more little bit of a question, and it has an absolute value on both sides. Okay, so what could you do if you have two absolute values? Okay, so there would technically be 4 cases because a normal absolute separates into 2. So this would be where the positive left side equals positive right side. So this side equals that side. What's another partnership you could do? What's another? You could do the negative left equals the negative right. You could do a positive left equals a negative right. Or negative equals. Okay, so there's one question like that. So you're going to have to do this side equals this side. You're going to have to negate this side equals the negative of that side. Da, da, da. And if you have multiple stuff in there, you're going to have to do the negative. You're going to have to negate brackets. Right? When you negate a side, and there's a few things on that side, what are you going to do? You're going to negate everything, like brackets, distribution, okay? So that is one of your questions to think about.